The wind swept across the open plains, carrying with it the smell of rain and dust. The evening sun sank behind the red cliffs, spilling fire across the horizon. The long grass bowed under the gusts, whispering secrets of the old world, a world where silence carried meaning and every shadow hid a story. A lone rider cut through the dying light, her figure sharp against the sky. Her horse's hooves beat softly on the ground, steady, like a heartbeat that refused to fade. The leather of her saddle creaked as she leaned forward, eyes fixed on the distant shapes of smoke curling from a camp. She was Apache, fierce, proud, and worn by the years that had taught her more than any words could. Her braids were tied with red cloth, her skin bronzed by the sun, and her gaze strong enough to still a storm. Yet that night, she did not ride as a warrior chasing enemies or hunting for prey. She rode from something unseen, something heavy that pressed behind her ribs like the weight of unspoken grief. Her horse snorted, feeling her tension, and she whispered soft words in her native tongue, calming the creature as the wind tossed her hair across her face. Far ahead, thunder rumbled. The smell of wet earth thickened. The prairie, endless and open, offered no shelter. To her right stretched the dying outlines of an abandoned settlement. Wooden frames, roofs half caved in, windows broken like hollow eyes. She slowed her horse, scanning the wreckage. A storm was coming, and even the proudest of warriors knew better than to challenge the sky. She guided her horse toward the largest structure, what had once been a general store. The door hung by one hinge, creaking with each burst of wind. She dismounted, leading her horse inside. The interior smelled of age and decay, but it would do. As she tied the reins to a post, the first drops of rain began to fall. Gentle at first, then fierce. She looked around the dim room, her senses alive. Broken shelves lay scattered, bits of glass crunching under her moccasins. Her hand brushed the hilt of her knife out of habit. She wasn't alone. Something about the air told her so. A flicker, a sound too deliberate to belong to the storm. Her body tensed, listening. A man stepped out from behind a collapsed counter. His clothes were torn, covered in travel dust. His face hidden beneath the brim of a weathered hat. His right arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, dark with blood. His eyes, when they met hers, were wary but not cruel. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the storm pounding outside. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, his voice low and tired. "I was only trying to keep dry." She didn't answer at first. Her hand stayed near her knife, her eyes sharp as flint. "You hide well," she said, her tone calm but guarded. "Been hiding a long time," he replied. "World's not kind to men like me anymore." The warrior studied him. His clothes told stories, a man who had ridden long, fought harder, and perhaps lost more than he'd gained. There was something in his eyes, a loneliness that mirrored her own. Still, trust was not easily given, not between strangers in a place where survival came first. The wind howled, shaking the walls. The roof leaked in thin streams. The fire she'd hoped to build would struggle to live here. She glanced at him again, then at the storm outside. He shifted slightly, wincing from his wound, but didn't move closer. "You're hurt," she said simply. He gave a faint smile. "It's nothing new." She tore a strip from her shawl and stepped forward, ignoring the flicker of caution that passed through his eyes. "If you bleed, the coyotes will smell it. Sit." He hesitated, then obeyed. The thunder rolled louder now, shaking the walls like drums. She knelt beside him, unwrapping his bandage. The cut was deep, old, but infected. She cleaned it with water from her canteen, her hands steady. He watched her in silence, the firelight of a small lantern between them throwing soft shadows over their faces. "You Apache?" he asked quietly. She nodded once. "Never thought I'd see one help a man like me." Her gaze lifted to meet his. "Then you have not known the right kind of Apache." The man gave a small, broken laugh. "Maybe not." For a long moment neither spoke. Outside, the rain poured harder, drumming on the tin roof. The world beyond that broken store disappeared into darkness. Inside, there was only the flicker of light, the smell of damp wood, and the steady rhythm of two souls breathing in the same silence. When she finished, she tied off the new bandage and leaned back. "You should rest," she said. I've been running too long to rest, he replied. She looked at him curiously. Running from who? He hesitated, then said, From what's left of my own people. Her brows drew together. Your people turn on you? He gave a slow nod. They call me a traitor. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am. But I'd rather live with guilt than live like them. She studied him, feeling a strange pull of understanding. She, too, had made choices that left scars deeper than wounds. They both carried ghosts. The storm raged on, winds howling like voices of the past. She fed a few sticks into the lantern flame, warming her hands. For a moment, the silence was soft again, almost kind. Then the door creaked open with a violent gust. Lightning flashed, and for an instant she saw movement outside. Figures, shadows. Men on horseback, distant but coming fast. Her body stiffened. The man followed her gaze and cursed under his breath. They found me. How many? She asked. 3. Maybe 4. Enough. She stood up, pulling her rifle from her saddle. Her eyes were calm, her voice even. Then we do not wait for them to come. He looked at her in disbelief. You're willing to fight for a stranger? She gave him a small, tired smile. You are no longer a stranger, you bleed on my floor. The words hung in the air, as natural as the storm outside. He stood, wincing, and loaded his revolver. Then we make our stand here. She nodded once. Yes, but not for long. We move when the thunder hides us. Outside, the riders drew closer. The flicker of lantern light caught the rain-slicked barrels of their guns. Inside, she moved like a spirit, calm, quiet, and sure. The wind lifted her dress slightly as she stepped toward the doorway, her braid swinging down her back. She glanced at the wounded man and spoke in a whisper so soft it nearly vanished under the roar of the storm. May I take shelter beneath your coat? He looked at her, uncertain what she meant, until she pulled the rough canvas from his shoulders and wrapped it around both of them. Together they crouched in the shadows, waiting. The sound of hoofbeats thundered through the earth. Her hand brushed the rifle grip, his tightened around the revolver. Their breaths matched, and then silence. Only the rain, the wind, and the beating of two hearts preparing for whatever would come through that door. Outside, a voice called out, rough and mocking. We know you're in there, coward. Step out and die like a man. The man's eyes met hers. In that look, there was something deeper than fear, something like fate. The wind howled again, ripping through the cracks, and the lantern flame wavered, throwing their shadows tall across the broken wall. She shifted her weight slightly, ready. Wait for the thunder, she whispered. The next flash of lightning turned the world white, and in that instant she moved. The night exploded with gunfire, and when the thunder rolled again, the story of the Apache warrior woman, and the fugitive she chose to save, had only just begun. The thunder cracked like the sky was splitting apart, and the night burst into noise and motion. Gunfire echoed across the plains, swallowed and scattered by the storm. The Apache warrior woman moved like a shadow, her rifle steady in her hands. The wounded man beside her fired from behind the half-broken counter, his jaw tight with pain. Lightning flashed again, revealing the figures outside. Their hats low, faces blurred by rain, guns glinting. The woman breathed slow, watching, listening. Every flash of light was a signal. Every pause a heartbeat stretched too thin. When the shooting paused, the man reloaded with shaking fingers. They'll circle us, he said, voice barely above the wind. They're not just passing through. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the doorway. Then you knew they were coming, she said quietly. He nodded, grim. They've been after me since Arizona. I thought I lost them by the canyon ridge, but they tracked me faster than I expected. Why? He hesitated, glancing at her. Because of what I took. Something they'd kill to get back. Her expression didn't change. And what did you take? A truth, he said after a moment, his tone heavy. Something they never wanted told. Outside, hooves stomped in the mud. Voices barked orders in the distance. She could hear the sound of men spreading out, their boots crunching on the soaked ground. She motioned toward the rear of the building where a small window had been shattered long ago. "We'll go through there," she whispered. The man frowned. "We can't. They'll see the tracks." "They'll see more than that if we stay," she replied. He hesitated only a second longer before nodding. Together they slipped through the window into the downpour. The rain was cold and fierce, but it masked their movement, soaking their clothes until they blended into the night. The woman led him along the edge of the abandoned street, past the skeletons of old homes and barns that looked ready to collapse under the weight of time. The wind tore at their coats, lifting her dress again as if the storm itself tried to pull her back. They reached the edge of town and ducked behind a wagon half buried in mud. She crouched low, scanning the hills beyond. There was only darkness and the faint outline of the open plains. Somewhere beyond that, freedom, or at least the illusion of it. "Who are they?" she asked. He wiped rain from his face. "Ex-soldiers. Hired guns now. Used to ride for a man named Dalton. He owns a mining company, or what he calls a company. Really, it's a graveyard for anyone who gets in his way." "And you?" "I worked for him once. I helped him clear the Apache from the hills near Santa Fe. I didn't know what that meant until it was too late." Her eyes flicked toward him, sharp and quiet. "You fought against my people." "I did," he admitted. "And I've been trying to make it right ever since." The wind howled again, tugging at her braids. She didn't speak for a moment, just stared out into the dark. The rain softened, becoming more of a mist. "Making it right is not something you can do with words," she said finally. "I know," he replied. "That's why I took the ledger. Dalton kept records of everything, every lie, every stolen acre, every life lost. I thought if I brought it to someone who could read it, it might mean something. But those men out there, they're here to make sure it never leaves this land." Her gaze drifted toward the horizon. "Then your truth is heavy enough to carry death." He gave a tired laugh. "Feels that way." The sky grumbled again, and for a few moments neither of them spoke. The world seemed endless and empty, except for the sound of rain and wind through the tall grass. She could feel his guilt, thick and old, clinging to him like mud. But beneath it was something else. A quiet strength, the kind that only comes from living through too much. She rose to her feet, motioning for him to follow. "We move east," she said. "There's a ridge that cuts through the valley. The wind will hide our tracks." They walked in silence, the storm fading behind them. The man stumbled once, clutching his wounded arm, but she caught him before he fell. He looked at her, rain dripping from his hat brim. "You could have left me back there." "I could have," she said simply. "Then why didn't you?" She looked ahead again. "Because I've seen enough dead men." The land began to change as they moved farther from the ghost town. The ground sloped upward, the air colder. Mesquite trees twisted in the wind, their branches black against the lightning-streaked sky. The smell of smoke lingered faintly, a campfire burning somewhere far off. She paused, raising a hand. He froze beside her. "What is it?" She tilted her head, listening. "Horses. Maybe 2, maybe 3. Not far. They followed faster than I thought." She glanced at him. "They know this land." "They rode it long before I turned against them." Her jaw tightened. "Then we use what they taught you." He met her eyes, nodding. Together they slipped off the path, moving through the brush until they reached a small ravine. The rain had carved deep channels into the soil, creating a hidden trail. She guided him down carefully, helping him when his injured arm made it hard to balance. When they reached the bottom, she crouched low. "We wait here until dawn," she said. "Then we move." He leaned against a rock, breathing hard. "You sound like you've done this before." She gave a faint smile. "Running, fighting, surviving, it is the story of my people." He looked at her through the dim light, really seeing her for the first time. There was strength in her stillness, but sadness too, a kind that didn't need words. "You said your people," he began. "Where are they now?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted toward the black horizon. "Gone. Some by war, some by hunger, some by the white man's promises." "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Don't be. We're still here. As long as one heart beats with our blood, we're not gone." The wind shifted again, colder this time. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small pouch, sprinkling herbs into the damp air. The scent rose, sharp and earthy. "What's that?" he asked. "Smoke for protection," she said quietly. "For guiding spirits away from those who still breathe." He nodded, though he didn't understand all of it. The two sat there in silence for a while, their breath misting in the cold air. The sound of distant thunder still rumbled, faint and far away now. When sleep began to pull at his eyes, he turned to her again. "What's your name?" She looked at him, her face unreadable. "Names are not always given freely." He smiled faintly. "Then what should I call you?" She considered this, then said, "Call me what the wind calls me." He frowned slightly. "And what's that?" She didn't answer, just looked up at the clouds shifting over the moon. Somewhere deep inside the valley, a coyote cried out. Hours passed before the first touch of dawn bled through the mist. The rain had stopped, leaving the world heavy and quiet. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, her eyes scanning the horizon. The man stirred, still weary, and followed her gaze. "We'll have to cross open ground to reach that ridge," he said. "If they're still behind us, they'll see us." "They will see what I want them to see," she replied. He gave her a puzzled look. "And what's that supposed to mean?" "You'll understand soon." Before he could ask more, she motioned for him to follow. They climbed out of the ravine, moving through the tall grass that sparkled with dew. The world felt fragile now, balanced on the edge of something larger than either of them. Halfway up the ridge, a gunshot cracked the stillness. The man dropped to one knee, cursing. The bullet missed him by inches, striking the dirt. "They're here," he hissed. The woman's head turned sharply. She could see movement in the trees below. 3 riders, dark and steady, moving fast. Her pulse stayed even, her eyes narrowing. "Keep moving," she ordered. He stumbled forward, breath ragged. "We can't outrun horses." "Then we don't run," she said. "We turn the land against them." He looked at her in confusion, but she had already moved toward the higher ground, crouching low and signaling for him to follow. The ridge curved sharply near the top, with loose rock and a narrow drop on one side. She reached the crest and looked down, gauging the slope. Then she pulled a small pouch from her belt, a fine dust mixed with groundstone and herbs. She scattered it along the edge, whispering in her native tongue. "What's that?" he asked, breathless. "Old wisdom," she said softly. "The earth listens when you speak with respect." Below, the riders advanced. Their shouts grew louder, their faces clearer. The woman raised her rifle, her movements slow and sure. The man crouched beside her, ready, though his hands trembled slightly. When the first rider reached the base of the ridge, she gave him a look, calm, steady and certain. "Now," she said. He didn't know what she meant until the ground beneath the horses began to shift, the rain-softened soil sliding like sand. The riders shouted, struggling to control their mounts as rocks tumbled down around them. The man stared in disbelief. "What did you do?" She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the chaos below, her face unreadable. "The land protects its own," she murmured. The riders retreated to safer ground, regrouping. They were angry now, shouting threats that carried up the ridge. She turned to him, her voice low and steady. "They will come again. They do not stop easily." He nodded, still catching his breath. "Neither do you." She gave him a faint, knowing smile. "That is why I am still alive." As the sun rose behind them, lighting the world in gold and fire, the two stood together on the ridge, wounded man and warrior woman, both bound by a truth neither fully understood yet. The wind carried the sound of distant hoofbeats once more, and though the day had begun, the storm inside the story had only just started to stir. The rising sun brought little warmth. It spread pale gold across the ridge, but the wind still carried the chill of the passing storm. The Apache warrior woman stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the valley below where the riders had retreated. Their silhouettes moved among the scattered rocks, searching, regrouping, plotting their next advance. The man beside her leaned on his good arm, breath uneven, his wound throbbing under the rough bandage. The land was quiet except for the wind sliding through dry grass and the faint call of distant hawks. But that silence carried danger, the kind that waits before striking. "They'll wait till night," she said finally, her tone certain. "They'll come when the shadows hide their steps." He nodded grimly. "Dalton's men don't stop until they finish what they start. They'll wait for the right moment, but they'll come. Then we make ready." She moved toward a cluster of boulders at the ridge's edge and knelt, examining the terrain. There was a natural slope leading into a narrow pass below, perfect for an ambush if used wisely. She studied the rocks, the brush, the direction of the wind. Her eyes were sharp, trained by years of surviving where others fell. The man watched her, trying to ignore the pain that pulsed through his arm. "You plan to fight them all?" he asked. "If the land helps us," she said softly. "And if you shoot true." He gave a tired laugh. "I used to be a good shot before all this." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Then you will be again." They worked through the morning, gathering what little they could. She set small traps made from wire and stone, the kind that could startle horses or distract a man long enough to matter. He helped her move brush to conceal their tracks, though every movement cost him effort. The air grew warmer as the day climbed, but tension hung heavier than the heat. By noon they rested in the thin shade of a mesquite tree. The man leaned back, wincing as he adjusted the bandage. "You haven't asked my name," he said, glancing toward her. She took a sip from her canteen. "Names come when they are needed." "Well, I figure if I'm going to die out here, someone should at least know it." She looked at him, a hint of a smile in her eyes. "Then tell it to the wind. It will carry it farther than I could." He smiled faintly. "I'll save it then, in case I live." Her eyes softened, but she said nothing. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint sound of hoofbeats. Both of them froze. The man reached for his revolver while she crouched low, scanning the horizon. But the sound was distant and light. One horse, not a group. Moments later, a young boy appeared at the ridge's edge, riding bareback on a small mare. He couldn't have been older than 12. His hair was long, dark like hers, and his clothes were worn from travel. The warrior woman stood, her face tightening with recognition. The boy's eyes widened as he saw her. "Sister," he called, voice breaking with relief. The man looked between them in surprise. "Your brother?" She nodded slowly, her guard still high. "He should not be here." The boy dismounted quickly and ran to her. "The camp was burned," he said breathlessly. "The soldiers came again. Mother told me to find you." Her face went pale, though her voice stayed steady. "When?" "2 nights ago. I rode through the river to lose them. They followed for a while, but I think they turned back." She put a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "You did well to find me." The man stepped forward, uneasy. "If the army's moving through this land again, it's worse than I thought." She turned sharply to him. "You knew this would reach others." "I didn't know they'd go that far," he said. "Dalton's men, the soldiers, they're all the same now. They clear what's in their way." The boy looked at him warily. "Who is he?" "A man running from the same enemy," she said. The boy frowned but said nothing. He looked exhausted, his face streaked with dust. She guided him toward a patch of grass where he could rest. Her heart burned with worry, but she buried it deep. "Sleep while you can," she told him. "We'll move before dusk." The boy nodded and lay down, his small body curling under the thin blanket she gave him. When his breathing steadied, the man spoke quietly. "I didn't mean for this. If they're hurting your people again, it's because of me." She looked at him, her voice cold but calm. "It is not only you. Men like Dalton have done this long before your guilt was born." He bowed his head. "Then let me help fix what I can." She studied him a long moment before nodding once. "Then stay alive long enough to try." The afternoon dragged on, slow and uneasy. The boy slept fitfully, muttering in dreams. The man tried to rest, but every sound made him flinch. The warrior woman stayed alert, scanning the horizon, every sense tuned to the world around her. By evening, the sky turned red again, just like the night before. The wind carried dust and the faint smell of smoke. She knew what that meant. Dalton's men were close, burning brush to signal one another. She woke the boy gently. "Time to move," she whispered. He rubbed his eyes, blinking at the fading light. "Where will we go?" "North," she said. "To the caves near the river. No horse can follow there." The man shook his head. "That'll box us in. If they trap us inside, we'll have no way out." She looked at him steadily. "Sometimes the safest place is the one your enemy thinks you'd never choose." He hesitated but trusted her instinct. They gathered what little they had and began their descent down the ridge. The boy led the mare, while the man followed close behind, limping slightly. The woman took the rear, her rifle ready. As they reached the lower ground, night began to settle in. The moon rose pale and watchful, lighting their path with silver light. Crickets sang in the tall grass, and somewhere far off a wolf howled. They moved quietly, avoiding open ground. But halfway to the river, the boy stopped suddenly. "I hear something," he whispered. The woman listened, faint at first, then clearer, the jingle of spurs, the low murmur of men. She gestured for them to hide. They crouched behind a fallen log as a small group of riders passed along the ridge above. Their torches flickered, shadows stretching long across the grass. One of the riders spoke, his voice sharp. "Tracks head this way. The boss says the girl rides with him. Dalton wants her alive." The woman's hand clenched around her rifle. The boy looked at her, frightened. The man's jaw tightened. He whispered, "They mean you." She shook her head slowly. "No, they mean both of us." When the riders moved on, they waited a long time before rising again. The air felt heavier now, filled with tension. The river's faint sound grew louder as they approached, a soft rushing through the rocks. By the time they reached the caves, the moon was high. The entrance was hidden behind a curtain of vines, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. She pulled them aside and led the others in. The air inside was cool and damp, smelling of stone and moss. They lit a small fire from dry twigs, careful to keep the smoke low. The boy sat close to his sister, while the man leaned against the cave wall, his face pale. "You should rest," she said to him. "I will. But we can't stay long." She nodded. "We'll move again before sunrise." The boy looked between them. "Where will we go then?" "To where the truth can't be buried," the man said quietly. "Dalton's mine sits on stolen ground. If people knew what was under it, what he did to get it, they'd tear him down themselves." "And you think anyone will listen?" she asked. He looked up, eyes fierce. "If the right person reads the ledger, they will." She considered that, staring into the fire. The flames reflected in her dark eyes, flickering like the thoughts she didn't speak. Outside, an owl cried in the distance. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint echo of voices. The woman rose, stepping toward the cave mouth. In the moonlight, she could see torches moving in the distance. Dalton's men were spreading across the valley. "They're hunting," she said softly. The man stood despite his pain. "We can't fight them all." She turned to him. "Then we don't. We vanish before they know we were ever here." He frowned. "You make it sound easy." She gave a small, tired smile. "It never is, but it is possible." The boy stirred beside the fire, watching them both. His eyes carried the same quiet fire as his sister's, the kind born from loss and strength mixed together. As the torches drew closer, their glow flickering through the brush, the woman pulled her brother close. "Stay near me," she whispered. The man checked his revolver one last time, his hand trembling but steadying when he caught her gaze. They stepped into the cool night once more, leaving the small fire to die behind them. The moonlight shimmered across the river ahead, and beyond it stretched the dark wilderness, unforgiving but free. Behind them, the shouts of men broke the stillness, followed by the crack of gunfire. The chase had begun again. The warrior woman led the way into the rushing water, her grip tight on her brother's hand. The man followed close behind, clutching the satchel that held Dalton's ledger. The current pulled hard, but she didn't slow. Her voice rose in a whisper carried by the wind, half prayer, half promise. The land protects its own. And as they disappeared into the black water, the echo of that vow lingered in the storm-worn valley, while the riders searched the empty banks, never realizing how close they had come to the truth. The river was cold and fast, pulling at their legs as they struggled to cross. The current hit hard against the wounded man, and his balance nearly gave way. But the Apache warrior woman caught his arm before he slipped. The moonlight shimmered on the black water, glinting like 1,000 silver eyes watching them. The boy clung to his sister's side, his small frame trembling from the chill and fear. Behind them, gunfire cracked through the night again. Bullets hit the water, splashing close, but the darkness hid them just enough. The woman whispered something in her native tongue, a prayer to the spirits of the river, asking it to carry them far from death's reach. They reached the far bank, crawling onto the wet earth, gasping. The man fell to one knee, clutching the satchel that held the ledger against his chest. The woman looked back across the water. The torches on the other side flickered, the voices growing fainter as Dalton's men searched the wrong path. For now, they had slipped away, but she knew it wouldn't last. These men weren't trackers by trade, but they had a scent for desperation, and they would not stop until they had what they came for. The night stretched long and restless. They followed a deer path through the tall grass until the sky began to pale. The first hint of dawn brought the smell of damp soil and smoke. Somewhere ahead, the land opened into the wide basin of the high desert, where canyons carved deep into the earth. The woman slowed, her eyes scanning the horizon. There was shelter there if they could reach it, a hidden camp once used by her people generations ago, where the rocks formed natural walls. She motioned to the others. "We'll rest there," she said. "No fire, no sound." The man nodded weakly. "You lead, I'll follow." The boy looked between them. "Will they find us again?" Her voice stayed calm, though her eyes betrayed the worry beneath. "If they do, they will wish they hadn't." They moved quietly, every step heavy with fatigue. The sun climbed higher, painting the cliffs in soft gold. When they reached the mouth of the canyon, the woman stopped and studied the ground. She knelt, brushing aside the dust. Tracks. Fresh. Someone had been there not long ago. She felt the earth with her palm, her expression tightening. "Someone's ahead," she murmured. The man reached for his revolver. "Dalton's? Maybe, maybe not." She rose slowly. "We'll find out." They followed the narrow path deeper into the canyon. The walls rose high on both sides, streaked with red and orange stone. The air was cooler here, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly. After a while, they saw smoke curling from behind a cluster of rocks. The woman raised her hand for silence and crept closer. When she peeked around the boulders, her eyes widened. 2 old men and a young woman sat beside a dying fire. Their clothes were simple, patched, and sun-faded. They were Apache, her own people. The older of the men looked up and saw her, his eyes narrowing at first in caution before softening with recognition. "Child of the Eagle clan," he said in their native tongue. "I thought you were gone with the last migration." She stepped forward, bowing her head respectfully. "I was far from home. The world changed while I was gone." The man nodded slowly. "It always does, and you bring strangers with you." The boy stepped out shyly, and the man's eyes warmed. "Ah, family still runs in your blood." Then his gaze shifted to the wounded man behind her. "But that one carries trouble like a shadow." The warrior woman nodded. "He carries truth, and men who kill for lies follow close behind." The old man's expression darkened. "Truth is a dangerous thing out here, more dangerous than guns." "Then help me protect it," she said softly. He studied her for a long time, then motioned toward the camp. "Rest. You'll need your strength when the storm comes." They spent the next hours in uneasy peace. The boy ate quietly beside the fire while the woman cleaned her rifle and watched the sky. The wounded man sat apart, his face pale, his thoughts far away. The old Apache elder sat near him after a while, handing him a small cup of bitter-smelling tea. "Drink. It will keep the pain from taking you." The man nodded his thanks, sipping slowly. You believe her, that I carry something worth dying for? The elder's eyes were sharp and knowing. I have seen men die for less, and I've seen them live for nothing. The question is which one you'll be. The man looked down at the satchel. I didn't mean to bring this much harm, but once I saw what Dalton was doing, how he used the army to take the mines from your people, I couldn't stay quiet. Quiet is how the world stays cruel, the elder said, but loud voices get silenced, be ready for that. As the day faded, the sky turned the color of blood again. The woman stood at the canyon's mouth, her hair lifted by the wind. Her senses stayed sharp. The land had gone too still. Even the birds were silent. She turned to the old man. They're coming. He rose without question. How many? Too many for comfort, she said. The man checked his revolver. Then this is where it ends. No, she said firmly, this is where it changes. The boy looked frightened, clutching her hand. She knelt beside him. You must go with them, she said, motioning toward the other Apaches. They know paths the soldiers can't follow. I won't leave you, he said stubbornly. You must, she whispered. The wind will guide you back to me. He shook his head, tears burning in his eyes. But the elder took his arm gently. Do as she says, child. The land will remember her fight. The boy turned away, his small shoulders trembling, and disappeared with the elders down a hidden path. The woman watched until they vanished from sight, her chest heavy but her eyes steady. She turned to the wounded man. They'll come from the west entrance first. The canyon walls will funnel them in. We use that. He nodded. You think we can stop them? We don't stop them, she said. We make them doubt. The wind began to rise, whistling through the canyon. Dust swirled, carrying the scent of sage and gunpowder. The first rider appeared in the distance, a dark figure on a black horse, rifle glinting in the fading light. Then came more, a line of them, their silhouettes stretching across the ridges. Dalton himself rode at the front, broad-shouldered and calm, his hat tilted low. He raised a hand and the riders halted. His voice carried clearly through the air. You've run far enough. Hand over what's mine and maybe I'll let you walk away. The woman stepped forward, her rifle steady, her voice ringing across the canyon. You've taken enough that was never yours. Leave now. Dalton chuckled, a cold sound. You think you scare me, girl? I've buried better fighters than you. She didn't move. The man beside her raised his revolver, his voice shaking but defiant. This ends tonight, Dalton. You can kill me, but you can't bury the truth. Dalton's face hardened. You think anyone cares about truth out here? All that matters is who's left to tell the story. He gave a signal, and his men spread out. The air grew thick with tension, the kind that makes the heart pound in rhythm with the wind. The woman could see them clearly now, their rifles, their faces, their certainty that they would win. She felt the pulse of the earth beneath her feet and whispered another prayer to the spirits of her ancestors. The first shot came from the canyon wall, hitting a rock near Dalton's horse. The animal reared and chaos broke loose. Gunfire cracked, echoing in deafening bursts. Dust filled the air. The woman fired, the recoil jarring her shoulder. The man beside her crouched low, returning fire as best he could with his injured arm. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks, sparks flashing in the dark. The fight raged, wild and desperate. Dalton's men tried to advance, but the narrow canyon made it hard to move. The woman used every shadow, every echo to her advantage. She fired, moved, vanished, then struck again. The man's revolver clicked empty, and he reached for more rounds. His fingers slick with sweat and blood. Above them, lightning flashed across the clouds, turning the canyon walls white for an instant. The wind roared louder, carrying the storm back to life. The woman looked up, rain beginning to fall, turning dust to mud. Her hair clung to her face, her breath sharp in the cold air. Dalton shouted something she couldn't hear, but his men began to regroup. They were closing in, step by step, tightening the circle. The man looked at her. We can't hold them much longer. She met his gaze, calm even in the chaos. Then we don't hold them. We lead them where the land decides. He frowned, not understanding, but followed when she gestured toward the narrow path deeper into the canyon. They ran, the storm chasing them, bullets striking stone all around. The path twisted between high walls, leading toward the old caves at the far end, the ones her ancestors once called the mouth of the wind. The roar of thunder drowned the shouts behind them. Rain poured harder, turning the canyon floor into a river of mud. The woman stopped near the edge of a deep crevice where the storm water rushed below. Dalton's men were close now, their torches flickering through the darkness. The wounded man gasped for breath, his arm hanging uselessly at his side. "If we jump, we won't make it." She looked at him, rain streaming down her face. "Maybe not. But they won't either." He stared at her, realization dawning. "You're going to bring it down." She nodded once, gripping her rifle like a staff. "The canyon protects its own." The sound of hooves echoed closer, growing louder until Dalton's voice carried through the storm again, shouting her name like a curse. She turned to face the oncoming light, her shadow stretched long against the rock, the wind whipping around her like a spirit rising from the earth itself. The man stepped beside her, his revolver raised again despite the pain. The rain poured harder, the earth trembled beneath their feet, and as Dalton's men came charging through the mouth of the canyon, the warrior woman whispered one last prayer to the land. The ground began to shake, rocks groaned, thunder split the sky. The moment before everything broke, she turned to the man and said softly, "If the wind takes me, let it carry my story." Then the world roared to life, and the canyon itself seemed to answer. The sound was like the sky breaking open. The canyon walls shook, sending a deep rumble through the ground. Stones loosened and fell, crashing down in clouds of dust and thunder. The wind howled through the cracks, carrying rain, grit, and the cries of men who realized too late what was coming. Dalton's riders tried to turn back, their horses slipping in the mud, their torches dying in the downpour. The earth beneath them gave way, swallowing sound and flame together. For a heartbeat, everything vanished into the roar of wind and stone. When the echo faded, only the storm remained. The rain came softer now, washing away the blood and dust. The canyon that had once been alive with gunfire fell silent. A thin mist rose from the ground as the night began to cool. From behind a boulder near the broken edge, the Apache warrior woman stirred. Her ears still rang from the crash. She pushed herself up slowly, her hands caked with mud. Her shoulder burned, and blood streaked down her arm, but she was alive. Beside her, the wounded man lay still for a moment before coughing weakly, drawing in a breath of cold, wet air. "Did we make it?" he rasped. She looked around at the collapsed canyon, the fallen rocks, the twisted remains of Dalton's pursuit. "We're still breathing," she said softly. "That's enough." He smiled faintly, though his eyes were full of pain. "You brought the whole mountain down." "It was the wind," she replied. "It only needed to be reminded of its strength." He tried to sit up, grimacing. "Dalton?" She scanned the wreckage below. Among the shattered rocks there was no movement, no sign of him or his men. The storm had claimed them all. She bowed her head, whispering something in her native tongue, a farewell for the souls who had met their end with greed still clutched in their hands. When the rain eased, they climbed out of the canyon together. The path was narrow, and every step was heavy with exhaustion. The man leaned on her for balance, his breath shallow. The night stretched endlessly, broken only by the low hum of the wind. By dawn, they reached the ridge. The sun rose slow and red over the horizon, spilling light across the desert. The woman stopped there, looking out across the wide land that stretched to forever. The world felt cleaner, like it had taken a long breath after a storm. The man sank to the ground, his back against a rock. His face was pale but peaceful now. He took the satchel from his shoulder and handed it to her. "You should have this," he said. "You're the one who made it matter." She shook her head. "You're the one who carried it when it could have killed you." "I carried it," he said quietly. "But you gave it purpose." He looked down at his trembling hands. "These papers, the names, the mines, the land they took from your people. It's all here. If it gets to the right hands, maybe something changes. Change is slow, she said, but it starts somewhere. He nodded, his eyes growing distant. Then let it start with this. She studied him for a long moment, her expression softening. He had fought not for glory or revenge, but because he couldn't stand silence in a world full of wrongs. That kind of courage reminded her of something she once lost, the belief that a single voice could still matter. As the morning grew brighter, the wind began to dry the rain from her skin. The boy and the elders would be far by now, safe in the northern valleys. She knew they would wait, watching the horizon for her return. The man's breathing slowed. His eyes fluttered, then closed. She sat beside him quietly, her hand resting on his shoulder. There was no need for words. The land would remember him, as it remembered all who had walked it with honor. When the sun finally reached the ridge, she covered his body with stones, the way her ancestors had done for warriors. Then she took the satchel and rose. The journey back was long and lonely. She followed the old trails through the desert, through valleys carved by wind and time. The storms had cleared the sky, and the air was cool and sharp. Along the way, she found tracks, the boy's small footprints and the deeper prints of the elders' moccasins. They led her north toward the place where the dry land met the pines. By the second evening, she reached their camp. The boy ran to her as soon as he saw her, tears streaking his face. She caught him in her arms, holding him tight. "You came back," he whispered. "I told you the wind would bring me home," she said. The old Apache elder stepped forward, studying her face. "The land trembled last night," he said. "We felt it in the hills. I knew you were part of it." "It took them," she said quietly. "All of them. The storm chose its side." He nodded, his eyes full of both pride and sorrow. "The earth remembers justice. It may take its time, but it never forgets." That night they built a small fire. The boy sat close to her, and she told him stories of her people, the stories her mother once told her beneath starlit skies. Stories of the wind that carried whispers of the past, of the rivers that remembered every foot that crossed them. When the fire burned low, she took the satchel and handed it to the elder. "This must reach the towns," she said. "The people there need to see what was done in their name." The old man took it solemnly. "It will go. Even if it takes many hands, it will go." The next morning the sky was a pale blue and the wind was gentle. She stood at the edge of the camp, looking out across the land. The scars of the storm were far behind, but she could still feel the echo of its power in her bones. The boy came to her side. "Will we go back to our home?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Home isn't always a place," she said. "Sometimes it's the road we walk and the stories we carry." He nodded, though he didn't fully understand yet. In time, he would. They set out together toward the east, where the grasslands began to stretch again. The air smelled of sage and sunlight. The woman walked with quiet strength, her rifle across her back, her heart steady. She had lost much, but she had kept what mattered most: dignity, courage, and the will to keep walking forward. In the years that followed, stories spread across the territories. Travelers spoke of a warrior woman who rode with the wind at her side, who stood against men who thought the land could be owned. Some said she vanished into the mountains, others that she crossed the border and fought for freedom elsewhere. But those who listened to the wind in the canyons swore they could still hear her voice when the storm rolled in, whispering like a memory carried through time. The boy grew older, carrying her lessons with him. He became a man who spoke with honesty, who remembered where truth had come from. And when he passed through the towns years later, the papers from that satchel had already changed hands, spreading through dusty offices and government halls. The names inside them could no longer be hidden. The truth had begun its slow climb toward light. The land healed little by little. The mines were abandoned, the soldiers gone. Grass grew again where blood had soaked the soil. The people learned to build small hopes from the ruins, because that was how life had always survived here, by starting over. On quiet nights when the moon hung low and the coyotes sang from the ridges, the people still told her story. They said she was not just a warrior, but a whisper carried by the wind, reminding them that courage does not end with the body, and truth does not die with the fallen. And when the wind lifted the dust across the plains, some swore it felt like the brush of her hand, steady, guiding, alive. A reminder that even in the hardest lands, a heart brave enough to love and fight could still change the course of the storm. The Apache warrior woman had once asked, "May I take shelter beneath your coat?" Now it was the land itself that took shelter beneath her spirit, wrapped in the memory of her strength, forever whispering her name into the endless wind.